This story is about an event that happened to my mother around 1972, when she was just 8 years old. She has told me about it since I was young, and she truly thinks about it and is affected by it to this day. To set the scene, both of my grandparents ran a restaurant/gas station in our hometown. They've always ran a business of some type since the 50s. This means that a lot of days my mom would have to take the bus home and stay by herself if my grandma had to stay and help run things, usually no more than an hour or two. My uncle, her older brother, would usually come home on the bus with her, but he was a little older and sometimes had football practice. So was the case on the day of the event I'm getting to. My mother arrived home on this day, let herself in the house and put away her things. She had just recently received a new puppy, and knew the first thing she needed to do was take the pup out to the yard to use the restroom. She wrapped the dog in a white towel, this is important, and walked him outside. As she put the dog down, she shook its hair out of the blanket, flailing it about in the wind. It's then that she noticed the neighbor's son was staring at her from across the street. This guy was in his late 20s, and was known to be very strange and mentally ill, though in the country mental illness seems to not always be recognized. He would do psycho shit like killing the neighbor's pigs or skinning stray cats and hanging them from a clothesline in their yard. Real sick shit. My mom said he always creeped her and everyone else out. She said he would stare at her when she would play outside, and made her feel genuinely uncomfortable. She said he appeared out of nowhere in his yard that day, and as she shook out the blanket, he began grinning and waving. Feeling more than a little shook, she picked up her pup, went inside, and locked the door. She began to do some homework, and after about 5 minutes of working, she heard a loud knock at the door. She slowly walked to the window to see who it was. She knew it wasn't my grandparents because, of course, they had keys. As she opened the blinds, her eyes locked with those of the creep from across the street. He was already looking in the window. She jumped and said she screamed a little as she shut the blinds. She walked to the door and made sure it was locked. She said he just continued with the slow, continuous thud on the door, almost in rhythm. And then she got really terrified as he began speaking to her through the door. "Hi, sweetie. I saw you with your doggy. Let me in to see him." She was in shock. "Come on and let me in, sweetie. Please, I just want to see your puppy." In full freak-out mode, my mom screamed, "You need to leave now. You need to go back to your house. I don't know you." He kept knocking. I can see the fear in my mom's eyes when she describes that part, and it gives my whole body chills. He yells through the door, "Damn it, let me in. I saw you waving your flag of surrender." I shit you not, the guy thought my mom shaking hair from the blanket was a flag of surrender, and a sign for him to come right over. My mom screamed, "I'm calling my dad and the police if you don't leave now." With this, the knocking stopped. She tried to catch her breath and shake off her fear. Then she got off from the door and ran to the basement level of the home. She made it to the phone and began to dial 911. All of a sudden, she heard a shatter from the next room. She looked over to see the crazed neighbor attempting to crawl through the kitchen window. He was ripping down the curtain as his upper body got through, and my mother screamed what was happening to the police on the phone. All of a sudden, he was bleeding from the abdomen where the window glass had cut him, as his lower half couldn't squeeze through. Then my mom began hearing my grandmother's screams. "What the hell are you doing?" Then the guy, yelling in pain, squirmed out the window as she hit him from behind with some tool that was laying near her garden on the side of the house. He managed to get out the window and bolted right back to his place. The police came. Grandma called my grandfather, and he arrived as well after shutting down the business as soon as she told him. They arrested him for breaking and entering and something else I believe was unrelated. On the day of his court date, he told them the white flag of surrender story, but this was the final nut on his crazy cake, as they put him in a mental institution that day. He may have gotten out at some point, but went back because my mother later said he died in an institution. Outside the courthouse, the crazy Appalachian redneck family of the creep tried to blame my 8-year-old mother, and the man's father called my mother a harlot. Needless to say, my army-trained grandpa beat the guy's ass on the courthouse steps as the local cops turned a blind eye. That story always stuck with me. My mom's had to receive therapy for it, so it haunts her a lot as well to this day. We always can't help but wonder, though, what would he have done to her if my grandma didn't come home at that exact moment? It will soon be 15 years since the events I'm recounting happened. I think that's why I'm thinking about it so much today. It seems almost unreal. I met Jacob when I was 15. He was 20. It wasn't a healthy relationship from the beginning, though it was never physically abusive. Jacob came from a large dysfunctional family, with what I now recognize as a malignant narcissist for a mother and a long-absent father. He and his brothers basically raised each other, and they were extremely close. My family wasn't exactly a shining example of normalcy either, which I think is enough background to give you an accurate picture as to what fueled our relationship. We were together for 5 years. It was tumultuous, and towards the end it began to get clearly emotionally abusive, but like most abused people, I was blind to that. It all seemed normal, until one day it wasn't. I won't outline all the sordid details, because as far as this sort of thing goes, it was bog standard. Slowly isolating me, demonizing my perfectly normal personality traits, slowly exerting control over the way I dressed and the like. Between 15 and 20 years old, one changes a lot, and he was right there with me in these formative years, being, well, a complete dick. At 18, I was accepted into a university on the other side of the country, and for a brief time we tried long distance before he moved across country and in with me. Up until this point, we had never really lived together. I had lived with my parents and he had lived with his brothers. Jacob was in IT. He was actually quite brilliant at it, but with his anger issues and insecurities, he had a hard time finding a job once he had moved out to be with me. As you can imagine, things started going downhill quickly. He had some savings, so he was paying his share of the bills, but we were together all of the time. He was always in the flat, playing video games or brooding to himself. His abusive behavior ramped up. This at the same time as my experience of a larger world outside our messed up relationship started giving me pause for thought about the whole situation. I was hesitant to break up with him, because he was all I had ever known, and he had moved just for me. He would be entirely alone should I do that. I know. Please cut me some slack, because I was 19. Time passed. I turned 20 and broke up with him, and everything basically went to script. It was easier than I thought it would be. I was ready to be done with him, and he went quieter than I imagined he would. There wasn't a tirade of abuse, only begging and weeping, which was horrible but also a relief. I wasn't expecting him to get physically threatening, and he hadn't. I called my friend Kayla, and she drove her truck over, and Jacob and I brought some of his things down to it. He rode away in the back. He started living on my friend's couch for a time. I started the process of clearing him out of my life slowly. I heard from a friend that he had bought a POS car to get around, and sometimes I would see him in it. It wasn't distinctive to look at, but it had a bum muffler and was terribly loud. And this is pretty relevant. About a month went by when the phone calls started. He would call me repeatedly between 1 and 4 a.m. At first I would answer, telling him to leave me alone. Eventually I had to start unplugging my phone at night. I would plug my phone in, and there would be voicemail after voicemail. I eventually started deleting them without even listening. Eventually there would just be one voicemail in the morning, and it would just be him breathing. More time passed. Months like this. I knew that Jacob was bouncing from house to house in my distant friend group, but I figured eventually he would sort himself out and move away, and that would finally be it. At some point, on certain days when I was in classes, I became uncomfortable, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. I knew he couldn't get into my classes, and to be honest, my first thought wasn't him. I didn't really think he would hurt me. He was just being a textbook terrible ex, but after 5 years, I still thought I knew him well enough. But this feeling would occasionally still come over me during certain parts of my classes. I would feel really disconcerted, and I could never figure out why. One night, several months post-breakup, there was a big snowstorm, and I had met someone and brought them home after a party. We were talking into the early morning, and at around 4 a.m. my phone rang. I had forgotten to unplug it. I saw it was his number, and I didn't answer. I unplugged my phone. Then my mobile phone rang. The new mobile. The one whose number I had only just got about a week before. This time the caller was anonymous, but I didn't answer. The voicemail they left was just heavy breathing. It was eerie. In my flat, in the unearthly quiet that snow brings down on a city, and my phone's ringing one after the other. This person I had brought home, I explained to them that I had a creepy ex, and while I was doing that, I heard a car start outside. A very familiar car sound. All at once I realized what had been bothering me in certain classes for months. I could hear the sound of Jacob's very distinctive piece of shit car, and here he was outside my flat, in the thick snow at 4 a.m., calling me on my brand new phone, watching my windows. This is when I felt the first real stirrings of fear. It had been more than 6 months at this point, and he was clearly not sorting himself out. I went to the window closest to the road. It was dark inside my flat, and I didn't think anyone outside would be able to see me looking out. I looked up and down the street, and all the cars were dark and under an unbroken layer of snow. I could very clearly hear his car running, so I knew he was close by, but he had clearly been there a long time, since I couldn't pick his car out from the many cars parked on the street. Eventually the car stopped running. I knew he had seen my new friend, and me coming back to the place from the party. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. I went to lay down with my friend, after checking the locks on the front doors, and locking my bedroom door. I didn't sleep at all that night. I was awake, listening for the sound of that car. At around 6 a.m. I heard a door slam. I went to look out the window in time to see a figure walking through the calf-deep snow away from a car I now recognized as Jacob's. The man was definitely Jacob, though he was swaddled in many, many layers of coats and looked to be wrapped in a blanket. I called Kayla as soon as it seemed a human hour to call someone, and told her everything. And then I asked her what she knew or heard was going on with Jacob. Apparently he had become more and more bizarre, and was no longer staying with people we knew. All his good guy credit had run out after a series of incidents involving drinking and belligerent comments, including one time where he had made a pass at a friend's girlfriend, and had to be kicked out instead of taking no for an answer. School was closed that day. The snow was too deep, and the city wasn't prepared for it. My new friend stayed with me through the day, but had to walk back to his place in the evening. I had been watching Jacob's car. Nothing. Just the footprints from where he had walked away from it in the early morning. My mind was full of worry. What should I do? Who should I call? I didn't know if I should involve the police. While I worried about this, still not having slept for a long while, I decided to take a bath to calm myself down. I double-checked the locks on the doors and the windows in my flat before I did. I was in the bath when I heard the front door downstairs scrape open, and the sound was distinctive. I very quickly surged out of the bath, wrapped myself in a huge towel and my robe, and ran down my hallway to my kitchen and grabbed the only big knife I had, and then went to the top of the stairs. I saw him outlined from the reflected light of the snow through my open front doors. I could smell him from where I was, old and new booze. I don't remember what I said, only that my voice was tied with panic. It was something like, "Stay where you are." He just looked at me from the bottom of the stairs, and in the deadest, calmest voice said, "I know how to get in. you know. There I was, cold and barely dressed, holding a knife and cursing myself for not having taken my cell phone into the bathroom with me, and the absolute lack of tone or inflection in his voice made all my internal alarms start screaming. I was poised on the balls of my feet, wondering what would happen next, when he just shuffled backwards unsteadily, shutting both of my front doors as he went. I went to my bedroom and locked the door behind me, then got my phone out and called Jacob's older brother, Robert. I know this seems weird, but I knew this family, and even being across the country, I knew that his brothers were the only people Jacob would listen to. I told Robert exactly what had happened in the last day and a half, and told him that if no action was taken by him, I was going to call the police in the morning, and I knew that Jacob had priors. Robert bought a plane ticket for himself, flew out the very next day to my part of the country, found Jacob, and took him away with him. A few days later, he called me to tell me that he had bought Jacob another ticket to a very remote territory of the country, and it had been one way. He was staying with their oldest brother, and he would not be let out of their sight until he had shaped up. I called some friends, who confirmed that Robert had showed up on the doorstep of a distant acquaintance's place where Jacob had managed to beg to crash on the couch. I breathed a sigh of relief. The snow melted. Jacob's car was still outside of my flat, but eventually someone called it in as abandoned and it was towed away. I wish the story ended there. Months went by and the phone calls kept happening. Infrequently now, but obviously him. I had changed my number twice in this time, and I couldn't figure out where the leak was. One day I got a phone call from Kayla, saying that a girl in one of the houses where Jacob had been staying was trying to get in contact with me. There were boxes of things he had left behind, and she wanted them gone. I was on the point of telling her just to throw them out, when she mentioned there were books. I had given him many beautiful books over the years, graphic novels and the like. It hurt me to think of them being thrown away, so I went over there to get them. I was packing up the books I wanted to keep, when a sheet of paper fell out of one of them. In Jacob's familiar chicken scratch was a very detailed list. Plastic rope, gaffer tape, extra large heavy-duty bin liners. The list was long. It was meticulous. It was horrible. A cold wave of nausea and panic washed over me, and I started carefully going through all the books and boxes. I found a motley collection of loose leaf and notebooks. In them were detailed fantasies to abduct, rape, and murder me, more and more graphically written. These were bad, but the worst was yet to come. Going over the papers, I realized that he had been systematically breaking into my house for months while I was not in my flat, going through my clothes and cataloging new dresses, things I had bought, his speculations on what I was doing, looking into my fridge, sitting in my room and just noting things. He had installed a back door into my computer. He had broken into my email. He had been watching me basically constantly, in more ways than one, from about when the first late-night calls started on my phone. He was counting the stains on my sheets even. He was checking what groceries I had been buying. Nothing in his notes had been dated, and he had never written my name on any of the papers, but the details were dead giveaways to me of the timing, of just how long he had been doing this. Horribly intimate details of my life with him before were mixed in and warped with the conclusions that he had drawn from stalking me over the months. Despite the lack of dates, I felt suddenly sure that the list I had found was one of the last things he had written up before his brother had fetched him away. It was wedged into the last book I had gotten him as a gift before the breakup. I still felt like I was floating outside of my body as I watched myself gather up all his possessions, not just the books I had come there to get, and I piled them into my car. I left without talking to the girl who had originally called me there. I just started driving, and eventually I stopped somewhere. I got out and was sick to my stomach for a while. I still didn't feel like I was in my body. I got a can of lighter fluid that I kept in my car, and I found a clear dirt area and burned everything. It wasn't easy. When people say to burn such and such thing, you don't realize how big and disgusting a black smoky fire it makes. To this day, I'm astounded that the police weren't called on me, and also that I didn't actually harm myself doing this. I was in a state I have never been in before or since, and my biggest regret is having burned those things. I should have gone to the police. I should have raised hell. Instead, I ran. I'm a coward. I moved house, went dark online, changed phones, changed every account I've ever had, including bank accounts. I've only told certain people about this. I've never gone back to my hometown. My mother moved to a different place several years ago, so I never even had to make an excuse about that. I even changed my name. My life has taken me through living in 4 different countries, and it will be 15 years soon, but he still found me. I had an email from him 2 years ago. I can't prove it was him, but I'm pretty sure it was. I've had a few scary encounters in my life. I'm not sure if that means I'm old or just a creep magnet, but this one still creeps me out. In the early 80s, when I was about 8, my family was visiting my uncle who lived in backwoods Missouri. He lived on a lot of land, and the only other people who really even lived on the street were relatives, so no one else ever just happened to be out there. This meant no one ever locked their doors, because random family members were always coming by for this or that. One night while we were there, my parents and aunt and uncle decided to go to a nearby town to go bowling. My brothers, who were 11 and 12, my female cousins, who were 6 and 14, and me, who was also female, decided to stay at home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but it started raining pretty hard and it got dark quickly. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in the dark house, but we cleverly called it vampire. There was a thin little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night, so the person who was it would lie on the mattress and fold it over themselves like a coffin and count down to midnight. When they got to midnight, they went looking for you. Again, all the lights are off, and you tried to make it back to the coffin before you got caught. Because the house was in the country, it was pitch black at night. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. What this meant for the game was that 1, you couldn't tell where the vampire was looking, so you just had to make a break for it. And 2, if you were extremely lazy, you could hide in the living room with the coffin and get to base quickly. Ben, my 11-year-old brother, was it, and was doing the normal countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet from him. As he's counting, there was a flash of lightning. I don't know if I was already looking at the living room window, or if the lightning made me look. But with the backlight of the lightning, I could see a man with his face against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face, as if he's trying to peer in, and looks exactly like the stereotypical creepster. Heavy set, scraggly beard and like. I could feel every hair on my body standing on end. Immediately I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I saw, but then I heard Ben sternly whisper, "If anyone is hiding in here, stay still." I sort of croaked out and "I'm here" right as there was another flash of lightning. Creepster was still there, but was no longer trying to look in the window. Instead, he was now looking towards the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where he was standing, Creepster was probably about only 5 feet from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Ben leapt over the couch and locked the door right as the Creepster started trying the handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided that it was best to let the Creepster know there were people home, and that we knew he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and then started turning on all the lights in the house. This is going to sound weird, but I was too terrified to panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to know and tell me what to do. He told me to go lock the other doors, and was yelling for everyone else to come out and lock all of the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes are hazy in my mind. I remember everything up to that point extremely clearly, and then I remember the end barely clearly, but I'm less clear about the middle. I know that I locked the side door, and then the sliding glass door on the back of the house. When we talked about it over the years, some people remember us seeing him out the back door as well. I don't think I remember that. What I clearly recall is locking the sliding glass door, and standing there frozen, hearing Ben in a very calm but firm voice say, "Close the curtain. Listen to me, okay? Close the curtain. So I did. Ben can't remember that part, and I just remember my fear in Ben's voice, so I'm not sure if I saw the creepster in the backyard or not. We tried to call the police, but my aunt and uncle had a stupid party line and it wouldn't work, whether from the storm or from a neighbor leaving it off the hook or whatever. We also tried to summon help on my uncle's CB radio, but we couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter, so he had a gun rack full of rifles in his room, but my older cousin was on an out-of-town hunting trip and took them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked like a real rifle. I remember vividly Ben putting me on phone duty, and Scott, my older brother, on CB duty, while he stood watch at the little square window in the front door with the BB gun. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back. He's coming up the driveway." The rest of us froze in fear, but Ben opened the front door and stepped out on the porch, pointed the gun and said, "Get out of here right now." Then we hear our cousin Kyle, who lived down the road a bit, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remember that we felt like we had been saved when he showed up. Kyle seemed really skeptical of our story, like we were playing a trick on him, even though we had no idea that he was coming. But he stayed with us until our parents came home. Honestly, I don't remember if we even told our parents what happened when they got back. There was definitely no police involvement, though. We just went on with our trip. But we never played vampire again without some mention of that night.